Adrian had always believed that life operated on a simple equation: work hard, trust the right people, and you'd find some semblance of peace. But that belief shattered the moment he walked into his apartment that evening and found the evidence lying there, cold and undeniable. The envelope on the table wasn't just any envelope, was a carefully chosen instrument of truth, one that tore apart the illusion of safety he had built around himself for years. He picked it up with trembling fingers, the weight of its contents heavier than anything he had carried before. Each photograph, each whispered confession on paper, each message saved and forwarded it, was all a meticulously documented betrayal. Adrian had devoted years of his life to building something real, something sacred, and in a single instant, it had all been fractured. He sank into the worn armchair by the window, the city lights outside casting jagged shadows across the room, as if the night itself was conspiring with his rage. The man in those photographs then smiled casually, unaware that his actions had sent ripples of destruction into Adrian's life. He had been cunning, meticulous, and seemingly untouchable. Yet here was Adrian, his heart pounding, his mind a hurricane of emotion, realizing that for every calculated move Ethan had made, Adrian's own life had been the collateral damage. It wasn't just anger he felt, it was grief, betrayal, and an aching sense of disbelief that someone he had once considered trustworthy could wield his trust like a weapon. Adrian's thoughts refused to settle. Memories of shared moments laughed over coffee, the quiet comfort of late-night conversations, the warmth of fleeting touches flashed before his eyes, and the truth that those moments had been tainted, manipulated, even used against him, pierced deeper than any blade ever could. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the man he knew with the man who had orchestrated this deception. How could someone be both familiar and a stranger at the same time? How could love and treachery coexist in one person's actions? These questions gnawed at him relentlessly. He closed his eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. His pulse thrummed like a warning drum in his ears. The instinct for self-preservation was there, yes, but another force surged beneath it, a force he hadn't admitted even to himself before, a hunger for revenge. Not just petty retaliation, but a deep, consuming desire to make Ethan understand the consequences of his actions, to feel, if only for a moment, the weight of Adrian's world crashing down around him. But even as that fire ignited within him, Adrian couldn't ignore the irony that twisted itself around his heart in his quietest moments. When he allowed himself to feel the raw edge of his emotions, he realized that a strange fascination with Ethan lingered, a pull he couldn't name, couldn't suppress. The first seeds of a plan began to form, delicate and dangerous, like threads of smoke curling round a flame. Adrian knew he had to be careful. Every move had to be deliberate, calculated. He couldn't afford mistakes, not now, not when the stakes had never been higher. And yet, in that very awareness, there was a strange thrill, a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. The thrill of control, the intoxicating knowledge that he could, if he chose, turn the tables in ways Ethan never imagined. But alongside that, there was another, more fragile emotion creeping in, a reluctant acknowledgement that perhaps, beneath the betrayal and the hurt, there was a connection worth exploring, something dangerous but undeniably magnetic. Adrian's nights became restless. Sleep eluded him as he replayed every encounter, every word, every glance between them, searching for meaning, searching for weakness. Every plan he sketched in his mind carried double weight, one path for vengeance, one path for understanding, for unraveling the complex knot of emotions that Ethan had tied around him. He scribbled notes, kept careful observations, and watched from a distance, all while keeping his own feelings locked behind a wall of icy composure. To anyone else, Adrian appeared calm, collected, unaffected, but inside, he was a storm of conflicting desires, a battlefield where anger and intrigue clashed violently. The hook, the moment that would ignite everything, arrived unexpectedly. A simple meeting, seemingly casual, orchestrated by circumstances rather than design. Ethan approached Adrian, smiling that infuriating, disarming smile, oblivious to the turmoil he had caused. And in that instant, Adrian realized that the line between revenge and something else, something he wasn't prepared to name, was thinner than he had ever imagined. He felt it in the heat of his gaze, in the tension in his chest, in the rush of adrenaline that surged through him as he forced himself to mask his inner chaos. Every calculated thought now carried a double meaning: how to strike, how to protect, how to watch. In that quiet, charged moment, Adrian understood one unshakable truth. The world had changed, and he had changed. The man he had been trusting, loyal, predictable, was gone, replaced by someone sharper, more cunning, more dangerous. And yet, beneath the surface of that new self, something tender lingered, uninvited but persistent, a reminder that even amidst the darkest desires for revenge, the human heart could still ache for connection, for understanding, for love. Every step Adrian would take from this point forward was uncertain, precarious, and fraught with peril. He was standing at the edge of a precipice, one hand gripping the burning desire for vengeance, the other brushing against the possibility of something deeper, more complicated, more consuming than he had ever anticipated. The game had begun, and Adrian knew there would be no turning back, not now, not ever. Adrian spent the following days in a blur of calculation and observation. He had to understand Ethan completely, his routines, his weaknesses, the little habits that revealed cracks in his carefully constructed persona. Every interaction became a subtle test, a probe to see how much of the real Ethan lay beneath the charming, untouchable surface. Adrian watched from the edges, a phantom in his own story, noting the small things, the way Ethan's fingers lingered on a pen, the faint smile when he thought no one was looking, the way he carried himself when he believed he was alone. Each observation was a thread, and Adrian began to weave them together into a tapestry of strategy and intent. Ethan remained oblivious. He laughed freely, engaged in casual conversation, unaware that Adrian's eyes followed him with a mixture of fascination and silent judgment. Every word Ethan spoke, every laugh he shared, became a building block in Adrian's plan. The desire for revenge, sharp and fiery, burned in tandem with a curiosity that Adrian couldn't deny. He wanted to understand the man who had caused him so much pain, to strip away the layers and reveal the person beneath. But with understanding came an unexpected danger: empathy. Adrian found himself recognizing moments of vulnerability in Ethan. That stirred something foreign in his chest. It was infuriating. How could someone who had hurt him so deeply still evoke a pulse of tenderness? Adrian's first encounter with Ethan after discovering the betrayal was carefully orchestrated. He had timed it perfectly. A public cafe, bustling enough to allow Adrian cover, but intimate enough that a private exchange was possible. He approached with the calm confidence of someone in control, masking the storm beneath. Ethan looked up, surprised but not alarmed, his smile widening when he saw Adrian. "I didn't expect to see you here," Ethan said casually. But there was an ease in his voice that made Adrian's chest tighten. I could say the same, Adrian replied, his tone smooth, controlled, but his mind racing. He noted every detail the subtle way. Ethan's eyes scanned the cafe, the tilt of his head, the casual flick of his hand as he tucked a strand of hair behind his ear. It was all minutiae, but to Adrian, it was everything. Each gesture, each inflection was a piece of the puzzle he had to solve before he could move forward with his plan. Conversation flowed naturally, almost too naturally. Adrian found himself laughing at things he didn't fully find funny, replying to jokes he didn't expect to care about. It was dangerous, intoxicating the way Ethan's presence seemed to disarm him, to pull him out of the rigid control he had built around himself. Every joke, every shared glance, chipped away at the walls Adrian had erected. And yet, he couldn't allow himself to falter completely. Every smile he returned, every laugh he echoed, was a calculated risk. One wrong step, one hint of his true intentions, and everything could unravel. As the meeting ended, Adrian walked away with a conflicted sense of triumph and unease. He had learned more about Ethan in that single encounter than in months of distant observation. He knew now how to manipulate certain outcomes, how to steer conversations, how to plant subtle seeds that would advance his plan. But he also felt a gnawing uncertainty. Something about Ethan's vulnerability, the subtle honesty in his laughter, made Adrian question the purity of his mission. Was he seeking revenge, or was he being drawn into a game far more dangerous? Then he realized a game where his own heart might be the ultimate casualty. That night, Adrian replayed every detail in his mind, analyzing, strategizing, questioning. He made notes, carefully outlining the next steps, plotting how to maintain the upper hand while keeping Ethan oblivious. Yet even as he scribbled diagrams and scenarios, he couldn't escape the tension building within him. The line between manipulation and genuine connection blurred, and Adrian felt it as a pull he could neither control nor fully resist. And so, a dangerous dance began, one that balanced precariously on the edge of trust and deceit, passion and peril. Adrian knew that each encounter, each interaction, carried the potential for both triumph and disaster. He was stepping deeper into a world where emotions were weapons, where desire and revenge intertwined in ways that could either destroy him or transform him. Every moment with Ethan was now a gamble, a test of will, a step closer to the inevitable collision between Adrian's thirst for vengeance and the unexpected stirrings of love he could not yet name. Adrian had spent countless nights mapping out Ethan's life, dissecting every encounter and calculating every possible move. He had convinced himself that his emotions could remain distant, that revenge could be cleanly executed like a precise machine. But the truth was far messier, far more dangerous. Every time Ethan smiled, every time his laughter rang clear in a crowded room, Adrian felt the walls around his heart crumble, imperceptibly, one piece at a time. It was maddening. How could someone who had caused him so much pain still evoke longing and curiosity in the same breath? The opportunity Adrian had been waiting for finally presented itself. Ethan had a small, exclusive gathering at his apartment, friends and colleagues mingling, unaware of the silent storm that Adrian carried in his mind. Adrian had orchestrated his invitation subtly, making it seem like a coincidence, a chance encounter that no one would question. But inside, his pulse raced. This wasn't just another observation session. This was the arena where his plan would begin to take shape. Every step, every word, every glance had to be deliberate. One mistake could unravel everything. As Adrian entered the room, the warmth of the environment contrasted sharply with the cold, calculated intent burning inside him. Ethan greeted him with that infuriatingly genuine smile, the kind that made Adrian's chest tighten against his will. "I'm glad you could make it," Ethan said, genuinely pleased. Adrian's mind immediately went to work, parsing the tone, analyzing body language, noting vulnerabilities. But beneath the strategy, an uninvited spark of connection stirred, one that Adrian tried desperately to ignore. Throughout the evening, Adrian navigated conversations like a tightrope walker, balancing the sharp edge of revenge with the soft pull of attraction. He asked questions, probed for information, all while masking the storm within. And as he watched Ethan interact with friends, charming, kind, even a little vulnerable, Adrian began to see pieces of the man he hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just a villain he wanted to punish. This was someone complex, layered, human, and then came the moment that unsettled him the most. A quiet corner, a brief pause in the bustling crowd. Ethan leaned in, speaking softly, as if sharing a secret only Adrian was meant to hear. Adrian felt his breath hitch, the line between hunter and prey blurring dangerously. Every calculated thought was challenged by the warmth of proximity, by the magnetic pull of connection. He could feel the tension, electric and almost unbearable, and he realized with a sinking clarity that his plan was no longer straightforward. Adrian's mind raced, cycling through contingencies and strategies, but each thought was tainted by something unexpected: desire for Ethan's trust, his attention, his presence. It was a dangerous distraction, one that Adrian knew could compromise everything. And yet, even as he fought against it, he felt it grow, undeniable and insistent, threading its way through every observation, every careful calculation. The night ended with Adrian stepping back into the cool air, heart pounding, mind racing. He knew that what he had seen and felt tonight would change the trajectory of everything. Ethan had unknowingly given him more than just information. He had given him a glimpse of connection, of humanity, of something Adrian hadn't allowed himself to hope for in years. And that glimpse was both exhilarating and terrifying. Adrian understood that the stakes had just risen. This wasn't just a game of revenge anymore. It was a delicate balance between exposing betrayal and guarding against the dangerous pull of attraction. Every step forward would be measured, every interaction a careful dance between strategy and emotion. And yet, deep down, Adrian knew one unshakable truth: no plan, no strategy, no calculation could fully prepare him for what was coming, because the human heart was unpredictable, and he had already begun to lose control. In the shadows of the city streets, as Adrian walked away from Ethan's apartment, he realized that his journey was no longer linear. It was a labyrinth of intention and desire, of vengeance and vulnerability. Every move would carry consequences, every choice a risk. And somewhere, buried beneath the carefully constructed layers of control, a fragile, undeniable emotion began to take root, a warning and a promise all at once. Adrian's plan for revenge had begun, but it was already entangled with something far more complicated, and he knew, with a clarity that sent shivers down his spine, that the next steps he took could either destroy them both or lead to an unexpected, dangerous, and intoxicating revelation. Adrian's nights grew restless, haunted by the memory of Ethan's smile, the warmth in his voice, and the subtle vulnerabilities he had glimpsed at the gathering. Every thought of revenge was now tangled with an unexpected thread of curiosity and something dangerously close to longing. He replayed the night in his mind, dissecting every word, every gesture, wondering how he could use the insights he had gained without letting his own emotions betray him. But the harder he tried to maintain control, the more elusive it became. The next day, Adrian found himself seeking opportunities to cross paths with Ethan, under the guise of coincidence, of friendly interaction. Every encounter was carefully staged, yet charged with a tension neither could ignore. Ethan's presence had an uncanny effect on him, disarming, intoxicating, infuriating all at once. Adrian noticed the subtle ways Ethan's eyes lingered, the slight tilt of his head when listening, the way he laughed freely without caution. It was maddening how effortless Ethan could be in drawing him out, while Adrian had to meticulously guard every reaction. One afternoon, a business event presented itself: mutual acquaintances, charity gala, an elegant affair where connections and impressions were everything. Adrian arrived with a polished exterior, every detail of his appearance meticulously calculated, but inside, his mind raced. He had to balance strategy with the undeniable magnetic pull he felt toward Ethan. As he entered the room, he immediately spotted him, surrounded by colleagues, yet distinctly apart, radiating a casual confidence that made Adrian's pulse spike. Adrian approached, offering a composed smile that masked the storm within. Ethan turned, their eyes meeting, and for a brief moment, the world outside seemed to fade. Words were exchanged, polite but layered with unspoken tension. Adrian noticed the subtle vulnerability against the fleeting shadow of doubt that crossed Ethan's face, the way his smile wavered just slightly when Adrian's gaze held him. That small crack, imperceptible to anyone else, ignited something in Adrian, a dangerous mix of excitement and longing. As the evening progressed, Adrian carefully orchestrated conversations that allowed him to learn more about Ethan's life, his routines, and even his secrets, all while maintaining the appearance of casual interest. He probed with precision, listening to every detail, every hint, every slight inflection in Ethan's voice. Yet, the closer he got, the more conflicted he felt. Ethan's openness, his subtle trust, stirred feelings Adrian hadn't anticipated. It was one thing to plan revenge against a faceless adversary. It was quite another when the object of that plan was a living, breathing man who could make Adrian's heart ache with nothing more than a glance. At one point, Ethan excused himself to take a call, leaving Adrian standing alone in a corner, surrounded by the hum of conversation and laughter. He exhaled sharply, the adrenaline coursing through him, making him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. The more he observed Ethan, the more he realized the dangerous truth. He was falling not for a fleeting moment, not for a superficial attraction, but for the person Ethan truly was beneath the carefully constructed layers. And that realization terrified him more than any confrontation or plan could. Adrian's calculated mind fought the emotions rising within him. He reminded himself of the betrayal, of the burning need for justice, for balance, for the consequences Ethan deserved. Yet every attempt to push back against the pull of connection only seemed to draw him in closer, entangling strategy with something far less controllable. Each smile, each touch of conversation, each shared laugh became a thread, weaving a bond Adrian had not planned, had not wanted, and yet could not resist. By the end of the gala, Adrian had gathered invaluable information, enough to advance his plan with precision, but also a dangerous awareness. His feelings were shifting, complicating everything. The line between revenge and genuine connection blurred with each passing moment. He knew that to succeed in his plan, he would have to confront this growing conflict head on. But even as he made that resolve, a quiet, stubborn voice in his mind whispered a warning. Emotions, once awakened, could not easily be contained. As Adrian stepped into the cool night air, he felt the tension lingering like a tangible weight. The city around him seemed distant, almost irrelevant, compared to the internal storm raging within. Every choice from here on out would carry consequences, not just for the plan he had meticulously crafted, but for his heart, which was already entangled in ways he could neither predict nor control. The path ahead was uncertain, precarious, and dangerously thrilling, a path that promised both vengeance and a possibility Adrian had never dared to hope for: love. Adrian could no longer ignore the way Ethan's presence affected him. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, a smile that seemed too personal, a laugh that lingered in his mind long after it had faded. But over time, the effect became undeniable, insistent, and infuriating. Every plan Adrian devised to gain the upper hand in his quiet campaign of revenge now carried an unexpected complication: his own heart. The man he had intended to punish was already infiltrating the most guarded parts of his soul. That morning, Adrian found himself at a cafe Ethan frequented, ostensibly by chance. His steps were measured, deliberate, but his mind was a storm of strategy and emotion. He watched as Ethan entered, moving through the room with effortless charm, unaware that Adrian's gaze was fixed on him with a mixture of calculation and something far less controlled. The casual way Ethan greeted the barista, the way he interacted with the few patrons who recognized him, all seemed mundane, but to Adrian, every gesture, every word carried meaning. And every meaning was a potential tool for his plan. Adrian approached Ethan with his usual, carefully curated calm, hiding the turmoil beneath. "Hey," he said, voice even, betraying none of the excitement and frustration coursing through him. Ethan looked up, his expression brightening, the warmth of recognition unmistakable. "Adrian, didn't expect to see you here," Ethan replied, his tone casual but tinged with genuine pleasure. It was infuriating. How easily Ethan could evoke a rush of emotions Adrian had sworn he could control. They settled into a quiet corner, and Adrian found himself balancing dual objectives: extract information, observe reactions, and maintain his composure, all while suppressing the growing attraction he felt. Every word Ethan spoke, every subtle inflection, drew him in, tugged at the walls Adrian had spent years constructing. He reminded himself of the betrayal, of the plans carefully laid, of the justice he intended to exact. But each reminder was countered by the undeniable pull of connection, by the warmth and openness Ethan exuded so effortlessly. At one point, Ethan leaned in, a subtle but deliberate gesture that Adrian could not ignore. "I've been meaning to ask," Ethan said softly. "Have you been okay? You've seemed distant lately." The concern in Ethan's voice was genuine, disarming, and it struck Adrian with a force he hadn't anticipated. For a moment, all calculations fell away. The thought of hurting this man, the very man whose kindness and vulnerability now held him captive, felt heavier than the betrayal that had once fueled his anger. Adrian masked his inner conflict with practiced precision. "I've been managing," he replied, though his tone betrayed nothing of the storm within. Yet even as he spoke, he realized the truth. Revenge, once a simple goal, had become entwined with something far more complicated, far more dangerous. Every interaction, every conversation, Every shared moment blurred the line between strategy and sentiment. Adrian understood, with reluctant clarity, that he was no longer an observer of his own life. He was a participant in a game whose rules he could not fully control. The afternoon stretched on, filled with small, seemingly insignificant exchanges, laughter over trivial matters, shared glances that lingered too long, touches that were fleeting but electric. Adrian felt the tension build inside him, a mixture of desire, frustration, and apprehension. Each encounter heightened the stakes, not just in terms of the revenge he sought, but in the battle raging within his own heart. Could he carry out his plan without losing himself entirely? Could he navigate the dangerous territory of proximity and attraction without falling into it completely? By the time they parted, Adrian felt both exhilarated and conflicted. He had gathered more insight into Ethan's life, more threads to weave into his carefully constructed plan, yet he had also allowed himself to feel something forbidden, uncontrollably and terrifyingly intimate. The line between hunter and prey had grown hazy. What had begun as a mission for revenge was now a precarious dance of emotions, where desire and strategy intertwined with deadly precision. As Adrian walked away from the cafe, the city bustling around him, he realized the precariousness of his position. Each choice moving forward carried the weight of consequence. He could pursue vengeance, risk exposure, and possibly destroy the fragile trust that was forming. Or he could let the unexpected pull of connection guide him, risking betrayal but discovering a path he hadn't anticipated, one that promised not just confrontation, but understanding, and perhaps even love. The battle within him was far from over. Adrian knew that with each encounter, with each interaction, the stakes would rise. Revenge and desire were now inextricably linked, and the man he had once intended to punish had become the very reason he questioned everything he thought he knew about himself. Every heartbeat, every glance, every laugh was a reminder that the path he had chosen was far more dangerous and far more intoxicating than he could have ever imagined. Adrian's plan had been meticulous, precise, a carefully constructed series of moves designed to ensure that Ethan would feel the weight of his betrayal. Yet, the closer he got to executing it, the more unpredictable his own emotions became. Every encounter with Ethan pulled him deeper into a web he hadn't anticipated, and every glance, every smile, every laugh chipped away at the icy walls he had built around his heart. The anger that had once burned bright and clear was now mixed with something far more complicated: desire, curiosity, and a dangerous longing. That evening, Adrian found himself attending a private dinner that Ethan had invited him to under the guise of friendship and reconciliation. The moment he entered Ethan's apartment, the familiar warmth of the space, combined with Ethan's easy charm, sent a jolt through him. He reminded himself to stay focused, to maintain control, to keep the plan moving forward. But the tension in the air made concentration difficult, as if the room itself were conspiring to unbalance him. Ethan greeted him with a smile that seemed effortless, natural, disarming. "I'm glad you came," he said, voice soft yet sincere. Adrian's heart clenched, caught off guard by the warmth that seemed to emanate from every corner of Ethan's presence. He managed a measured reply, "Of course. I wouldn't miss it," though inside, he was aware of the storm building behind his calm facade. As the evening progressed, conversation flowed naturally, with laughter and shared memories intertwining in ways that made Adrian's pulse quicken. He noted every detail with a dual purpose: to maintain the pretense of casual camaraderie while simultaneously gathering information to strengthen his strategy. Yet the more he observed Ethan, the more he found himself caught off guard by his reactions, his empathy, his attentiveness, the subtle way he seemed to read Adrian's moods without even trying. Adrian realized with a jolt that he was being influenced in ways he hadn't planned, that his carefully calculated plan was already slipping into unpredictability. At one point, Ethan excused himself to take a call, leaving Adrian momentarily alone in the soft glow of the apartment's lighting. Adrian leaned against the counter, exhaling sharply, aware of the intensity of his own emotions. The desire to execute his plan clashed violently with the unexpected pull of connection he felt toward Ethan. He had intended to remain detached, calculating, unemotional, but now he found himself acutely aware of the man's presence, the warmth of his energy, the magnetism of his personality. When Ethan returned, Adrian felt a jolt in his chest. Their eyes met, lingering longer than was necessary, carrying a tension neither could fully articulate. Words were spoken, careful, polite, casual, but beneath the surface, a silent dialogue unfolded. A negotiation of trust, power, and unspoken longing. Adrian felt the edge of his anger soften, replaced by a dangerous vulnerability he hadn't allowed himself in years. The battle between revenge and desire was no longer theoretical, it was a living, breathing force inside him, impossible to ignore. Dinner ended with laughter and the clinking of glasses, but Adrian left with his mind spinning. He had gained insight, yes, but at the cost of clarity. Every detail he had observed, every conversation he had analyzed, now carried the weight of emotional entanglement. He knew that the next steps would be critical. Any miscalculation could expose his intentions, or, worse, make him vulnerable in ways he had never imagined. Walking through the quiet streets after leaving Ethan's apartment, Adrian felt the duality of his position acutely. He had the power to enact his revenge, to reclaim control over the chaos that had invaded his life. Yet he also carried the dangerous awareness that his heart was no longer entirely his own. Ethan had become a variable Adrian could not control, a force that challenged every assumption, every plan, every motive. And Adrian understood that navigating this path would require precision, courage, and the willingness to confront emotions he had long buried. For the first time, he questioned the simplicity of his initial plan. Revenge, he realized, was no longer just a target. It was entwined with desire, curiosity, and the growing acknowledgement that Ethan was more than the betrayal he had orchestrated. The complexity of the situation left Adrian unsettled, yet exhilarated, aware that the coming days would test both his resolve and his heart. The lines between strategy and sentiment, between punishment and passion, were dissolving, and Adrian knew that there was no turning back from the path he had begun to walk. Adrian thought he had Ethan figured out, thought he had studied every gesture, every smile, every carefully concealed flaw. But as the days passed, he began to sense that there were pieces of Ethan's life he hadn't anticipated, secrets hidden beneath layers of charm and vulnerability. The discovery came almost by accident, offhand comment during a private conversation, a fleeting hesitation in Ethan's eyes that betrayed a story he hadn't told. Adrian froze, realizing that these small, seemingly insignificant details carried far more weight than he had imagined. The revelation hit him like a thunderclap. Ethan had a past, one marked by experiences that explained, in part, the man he had become, the choices he had made, the defenses he had erected, the kindness and empathy he now extended so naturally. Adrian found himself reeling, caught between the carefully planned course of revenge and the new understanding of Ethan's history. It wasn't just betrayal and anger anymore. It was layered, complicated, human. And the more Adrian learned, the harder it became to separate his feelings from the mission he had sworn to complete. Adrian spent the night replaying the conversation in his mind, analyzing every nuance. Every word Ethan had spoken carried multiple meanings, and the realization that he had been unaware of these truths filled Adrian with a mixture of awe, frustration, and a reluctant respect. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the man he intended to punish was not a villain in the simple, one-dimensional sense he had imagined. Ethan's past explained but did not excuse the betrayals, but it complicated Adrian's feelings in ways he wasn't prepared for. The next encounter was charged with tension, an invisible current that neither could fully articulate. Adrian observed Ethan closely, noticing subtle signs of vulnerability, the way his fingers twitched when nervous, the slight downward tilt of his gaze when he remembered painful moments. Every detail was a revelation, and each one tugged at Adrian's resolve. He felt the pull of empathy mixed with lingering desire, a dangerous combination that threatened to unravel the careful balance he had maintained. Adrian found himself questioning his own intentions. The plan, once clear and linear, now felt fragile, almost naive. Could he pursue revenge against someone whose humanity he now understood? Could he exact punishment without acknowledging the complexity of the man he had grown to see in full dimension? The questions were relentless, echoing in his mind as he watched Ethan move through the world with effortless grace and concealed pain. As the days passed, Adrian realized that the knowledge of Ethan's past gave him power, yes, but also responsibility. The same information that could be weaponized in his revenge plan now demanded careful consideration. Every decision carried moral weight. Every action threatened to either deepen the rift or offer the possibility of understanding. And Adrian felt the weight keenly, aware that the line between manipulation and connection had become perilously thin. One evening, as they met under the pretense of casual conversation, Adrian felt the tension reach a peak. Ethan spoke of a loss he had endured years ago, a wound that had shaped him in silence. Adrian listened, silent and attentive, and in that moment, something shifted. The anger that had fueled him for so long softened, replaced by a mixture of compassion, intrigue, and a growing, undeniable attraction. Ethan's openness, his willingness to reveal pain, created a connection Adrian had not anticipated and could not ignore. Adrian left that encounter both enlightened and conflicted. He understood more about Ethan than ever before, but he also realized that the clarity he sought for revenge was now clouded by something far less controllable: emotion. The knowledge of Ethan's past did not diminish the betrayal, but it added layers of complexity that threatened to dismantle the plan he had so carefully constructed. And Adrian recognized, with a mixture of apprehension and exhilaration, that the coming days would test his resolve in ways he had never anticipated, pushing him to confront not only Ethan's secrets, but his own doubt. As Adrian walked alone that night, the city lights casting long shadows across the streets, he felt the collision of past and present, of revenge and desire shaping the path before him. He knew that the stakes had changed. This was no longer a simple game of justice and retribution. It was a delicate balance between understanding and punishment, between attraction and strategy. And somewhere deep within, Adrian felt the first real stirrings of something he had not allowed himself to name: the possibility that what he sought through revenge might be eclipsed by something far more dangerous, far more intoxicating: love. Adrian had convinced himself he could manage the delicate balance between strategy and emotion, that he could move closer to revenge without letting the personal entanglement with Ethan derail him. Yet, as the days passed, he began to sense that the plan he had so meticulously crafted was unraveling under its own weight. Every interaction with Ethan, every glance that lingered too long, every casual touch became a thread threatening to pull apart the carefully constructed fabric of his intentions. The tension was palpable the moment Adrian arrived at Ethan's loft for a scheduled meeting, a pretense of casual conversation under the guise of normality. But both men knew, even without speaking, that the air was charged. Ethan's smile was warmer than usual, his gaze more focused, as if he sensed the storm behind Adrian's controlled exterior. The proximity was disarming, and Adrian struggled to maintain the rigid composure he had perfected over weeks of preparation. "You've been quiet," Ethan said softly, tilting his head. "Something on your mind?" His tone was casual, but the concern in his eyes pierced deeper than Adrian anticipated. For a moment, Adrian froze, caught between the desire to reveal the truth, to let the floodgates of emotion open, and the imperative to maintain control. He forced a neutral expression, careful not to betray the swirling storm within. "Just thinking," Adrian replied evenly, masking the tumult of conflicting emotions. But every syllable, every movement, carried unintentional weight. Ethan's presence seemed to amplify the tension, forcing Adrian to confront feelings he had long buried. Anger, yes, but also fascination, longing, and a dangerous vulnerability that he had not accounted for. As the evening progressed, the conversation wandered into unexpected territory. Ethan shared a personal anecdote, a small vulnerability, and Adrian felt the pull of empathy tightened around his chest. He realized that he was no longer merely observing Ethan, he was participating, reacting, responding, and the lines between manipulation and genuine connection were blurring. Every word Ethan spoke, every subtle gesture, chipped away at the resolve that had guided Adrian for weeks. Adrian's internal struggle became almost unbearable. The revenge plan, once clear and linear, now seemed frail, easily shattered by the intensity of their connection. Each carefully calculated move was complicated by emotions he could neither suppress nor fully understand. Anger and desire coexisted uneasily, each threatening to overwhelm the other, and Adrian began to question whether he could continue the mission without destroying himself in the process. The pivotal moment arrived unexpectedly, a shared laugh. Over a minor incident, the way Ethan's eyes crinkled, the warmth in his smile, triggered a flood of emotion Adrian had not anticipated. The carefully maintained distance collapsed in an instant, leaving him vulnerable, aware of the magnetic pull between them. For the first time, he admitted to himself that revenge was no longer the sole driving force. The attraction, the connection, the quiet longing were equally powerful, equally dangerous. Adrian left Ethan's loft that night with his mind in chaos. The lines between strategy and sentiment, between punishment and desire, were no longer distinct. He understood that the plan could no longer be executed in isolation from the feelings stirring within him. Every choice now carried emotional consequences, and every step forward risked exposure not just of his strategy, but of the vulnerability he had so carefully hidden. Walking through the darkened streets, the weight of the duality pressed on him. Revenge and desire were intertwined, inseparable in ways he hadn't anticipated. The game had shifted. It was no longer just a battle of strategy and deceit. It had become a war of hearts, a conflict between control and surrender, between the cold precision of vengeance and the unpredictable warmth of connection, Adrian realized the danger he faced. To continue on the path of revenge without acknowledging the growing bond could destroy both him and Ethan. Yet to surrender to the pull of emotion could leave him exposed, unprotected, and at the mercy of feelings he could not fully trust. The precariousness of the situation was exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure, a testament to the unpredictable power of human connection. As the city lights flickered along the quiet avenues, Adrian knew that the next steps he took would define the course of both his plan and his heart. The stakes had never been higher. Every encounter, every word, every glance carried the potential to advance the mission or unravel it entirely. And deep down, Adrian recognized the undeniable truth. He was no longer solely a seeker of revenge. He was a man caught in the delicate, dangerous, intoxicating balance between justice and desire, and the outcome remained uncertain. Adrian had never felt such conflicting forces pulling at him. Every step closer to Ethan, every smile returned, every laugh shared, threatened to undo the careful, calculated plan he had spent weeks constructing. The tension had reached a crescendo, and he could feel it in every fiber of his being. He was walking a razor's edge, balancing the intoxicating pull of connection against the burning need for revenge. Each heartbeat was a reminder that one misstep could shatter everything. The opportunity arrived in a way Adrian had anticipated yet feared their confrontation. Ethan, unaware of the underlying tension, invited him to a private meeting under the guise of clarity and conversation. Adrian arrived early, his mind racing, reviewing every possible scenario, every word, every gesture. The stakes were higher than ever. This was the moment when control had to be absolute or carefully surrendered. When Ethan finally entered, the casual smile that greeted him was laced with something unspoken, something Adrian could feel as tangibly as the warmth of the room. "Adrian," Ethan said softly, "there's something I need to be honest about." The words hit Adrian like a lightning strike. He froze, his carefully rehearsed calm momentarily shaken. Every instinct screamed that this was the turning point, the moment when truth, desire, and strategy would collide as Ethan spoke, revealing layers of vulnerability and truths Adrian had not expected. The plan, in Adrian's mind, began to waver. Each confession, each admission, tugged at the carefully guarded emotions he had tried to suppress. Ethan's openness was disarming, igniting a fire within Adrian that he could neither extinguish nor fully embrace. The man he had intended to punish with calculated precision now stood before him, human, flawed, and achingly real. Adrian struggled to maintain composure. Anger and desire collided violently within him, creating a tension so potent it threatened to explode. Every word Ethan spoke seemed to strip away the last remnants of his resolve. The meticulously plotted steps of his revenge plan felt fragile, insubstantial, as though a single word or glance could unravel them completely. He realized with growing fear and fascination that he was no longer in control. The plan had become secondary to something far more dangerous. The connection forming between them, yet Adrian could not abandon his purpose entirely. He masked his internal conflict, carefully navigating the conversation, probing gently for more insight while guarding the full extent of his emotions. But even as he maneuvered, he felt the stakes escalate. This confrontation was no longer just about exposing betrayal. It had become a test of wills, a battle between heart and strategy, between revenge and desire. As the conversation deepened, Adrian sensed a subtle shift. Ethan's honesty, his vulnerability, and the quiet intensity in his gaze created a space where Adrian's carefully constructed defenses faltered. The anger that had driven him for so long softened, replaced by empathy, fascination, and a desire he could neither name nor fully control. Every instinct screamed caution, yet every heartbeat urged connection. The dichotomy tore at him, forcing him to confront feelings he had long buried, feelings that threatened to undermine everything he had planned. By the time the meeting ended, Adrian was left with a heady mix of clarity and confusion. He had gained insight, yes, but at a cost. The revenge he had meticulously plotted no longer seemed straightforward. The emotional entanglement made every move precarious, every step a potential disaster or a revelation. The line between enemy and desire had blurred beyond recognition, and Adrian understood with cold certainty that nothing about this path would be simple, predictable, or safe. As he walked away, the weight of the evening pressed on him. The stakes had never been higher, the risks never more personal. Every choice from this point forward carried emotional and strategic consequences, each one capable of altering the delicate balance between justice and connection. Adrian realized that he was no longer solely a seeker of revenge. He was a participant in a game of hearts and wills where the outcome remained uncertain, fragile, and dangerously intoxicating. In the quiet of the night, alone with his thoughts, Adrian acknowledged a truth he could no longer deny. The confrontation had changed everything. The man he had intended to punish was now inseparably entwined with his own desires, and every step forward would test not only his plans, but the very essence of his heart. He was teetering on the edge, and the fall into revenge, into love, or both was imminent. Adrian's nights had become restless, haunted by the memory of Ethan's voice, the warmth of his smile, the subtle intimacy of their shared glances. Every calculated step he had planned for revenge now felt like walking on a tightrope above a chasm where one misstep could unravel not only his mission, but also the fragile threads of connection that had formed between them. The stakes had never been higher, and Adrian felt the pressure crushing in from all sides: his desire for justice, his growing emotional attachment, and the unpredictable pull of attraction. It was during a late evening meeting, under the guise of discussing a mutual project, the tension reached its apex. Adrian had rehearsed every word, every expression, every subtle gesture. But from the moment he stepped into Ethan's apartment, the careful control he had maintained began to slip. Ethan's presence was magnetic, disarming, impossible to ignore. There was an unspoken intensity in the air, a tension that neither could fully articulate, but both felt with every breath. "You've been different lately," Ethan said softly, his gaze lingering on Adrian, in a way that made his pulse spike. There was curiosity there, yes, but also concern, a subtle vulnerability that made Adrian's chest tighten. He forced a calm exterior, masking the storm within. "Different how?" he asked, his tone measured, though the slightest tremor betrayed him. Ethan stepped closer, the proximity igniting a chain reaction Adrian had tried to suppress. The scent of him, the warmth of his presence, the faint catch in his voice, everything was amplified, every sensory detail magnified. Adrian felt the pull of desire clash violently with the determination to execute his plan. Anger, resentment, and longing collided within him, creating a tension so raw it left him almost breathless. The conversation turned deeper, more personal. Ethan revealed layers of himself, past regrets, moments of vulnerability, truths he had rarely shared with anyone. Adrian listened, torn between the need to seize this information for his plan and the undeniable draw of connection that surged with each word. He realized, with a mixture of fear and fascination, that his mission was no longer straightforward. Revenge and emotion had become inseparable, and the danger lay not only in exposure, but in the fragile grip of his own heart. A sudden gesture hand brushing against his own. A fleeting but intentional touch sent Adrian reeling. Every calculation, every carefully plotted move, seemed inadequate against the raw intensity of the moment. He could feel the duality of his situation with terrifying clarity, the desire to punish, the desire to protect, the longing to surrender. He was trapped between strategy and sentiment, a prisoner of his own carefully concealed emotions. Adrian stepped back slightly, trying to regain composure, but he knew the truth. He could no longer approach this mission with cold detachment. The connection he felt was real, undeniable, and dangerously consuming. To continue on the path of revenge without acknowledging the pull between them could lead to disaster. But to give in to the pull of emotion could compromise everything he had worked for. Ethan's eyes searched his silent questions hanging in the space between them. Adrian felt the weight of choice pressing down like a physical force. Every heartbeat was a reminder that the next decision could define not only the trajectory of the plan, but the trajectory of their lives. He had to decide that he prioritized the revenge that had consumed him for so long, or the connection that threatened to dismantle every carefully constructed defense. In the quiet intensity of that room, Adrian understood the gravity of the moment. There was no turning back, no simple resolution. The battle between heart and strategy had reached its climax, and every step he took from here would carry consequences he could neither fully predict nor control. The lines between enemy and desire, between justice and passion, had blurred beyond recognition, leaving Adrian to navigate a treacherous path where love and vengeance coexisted in fragile, dangerous balance. As the evening drew to a close, Adrian, left with his mind racing and his emotions in turmoil. He knew that the coming days would demand courage, clarity, and the willingness to confront not only Ethan's truths, but the truths within himself. The stakes were personal, perilous, and intimate, and he was acutely aware that the outcome would hinge on a choice he could no longer defer, choice that would determine whether his life would be consumed by revenge or transformed by love. The days following Adrian's critical realization were a storm of conflicting emotions. Every moment spent with Ethan was a delicate dance between restraint and surrender, between strategy and desire. Adrian's mind raced constantly, calculating, analyzing, trying to predict outcomes. But the heart of force he had long considered unreliable and dangerous refused to be tamed. It pulled him toward Ethan with a force that was both intoxicating and terrifying, and he found himself questioning everything he had believed about control, justice, and connection. Adrian arranged another meeting, ostensibly to continue discussions about their mutual interests. Yet beneath the surface, every action, every word, carried dual intentions. He had to maintain the facade of detachment to shield his plan from exposure, while simultaneously navigating the growing emotional tension that neither of them could deny. The stakes had never been higher. The lines between pursuit of revenge and surrender to attraction blurred with each passing moment. Ethan greeted him with that familiar warmth, a combination of charm and quiet intensity that sent a shiver down Adrian's spine. "I feel like we need to talk," Ethan said softly, a subtle seriousness underlying his casual tone. Adrian's pulse quickened. He sensed that this conversation would be pivotal in an intersection where truth, desire, and strategy would collide. Every instinct screamed caution, but every fiber of his being urged him to lean in, to allow the connection that had grown so dangerously strong. As they settled, Ethan began to speak, carefully, revealing vulnerabilities he had kept hidden from nearly everyone. Adrian listened intently, his analytical mind processing the information even as his heart reacted with a force he could not suppress. Each confession, each honest admission, chipped away at the walls he had built around himself, revealing the growing, undeniable attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface. It was exhilarating, terrifying, for the first time. Adrian realized that his plan for revenge could no longer exist in isolation from his emotions. Every observation, every calculated step, was now inextricably linked to the connection forming. Between them, he was caught in a dangerous balancing act. How to pursue justice for the wrongs committed while navigating the raw, magnetic pull of love that threatened to upend everything. Then came the moment that changed everything. Ethan reached out, hesitated, then brushed his hand against Adrian's in a gesture both fleeting and electric. The contact was enough to shatter the fragile composure Adrian had maintained for so long. His mind screamed with reminders of betrayal and the careful plan he had constructed, but his body and heart responded with uncontainable intensity. Desire, empathy, and the unspoken possibility of love collided within him, leaving him simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. Adrian struggled to regain control, to mask the surge of emotion threatening to betray him. Yet he knew that every calculated move, every word spoken from this point forward, carried extraordinary weight. One misstep could destroy the tenuous trust forming between them, derail the plan he had so carefully laid, or leave him vulnerable in ways he could never recover from. The room seemed to pulse with tension, each heartbeat a reminder of the stakes, the collision of justice, desire, and the human heart. As their conversation drew to a close, Adrian stepped back, trying to steady the tempest within him. He realized that the coming days would demand decisions that were no longer about simple strategy. They were about navigating the intricate interplay of betrayal, attraction, and vulnerability. The path ahead was unpredictable, fraught with danger, and impossibly thrilling. Every choice would matter, every glance, every word, every gesture, carrying the potential to either bring them closer or shatter the delicate balance entirely. Walking away that night, Adrian felt both the weight of responsibility and the intoxicating pull of possibility. Revenge and desire, justice and love were now inextricably linked, and he understood that the next step he took could define not just the outcome of his mission, but the course of his heart. The game he had begun with calculated precision had transformed into something far more complex, far more perilous, and far more intoxicating than he could have imagined. Adrian knew with unwavering clarity that the end game was approaching. The collision between plan and passion, between vengeance and vulnerability, was inevitable. And deep within him, he felt the truth he had tried to deny. His heart was no longer an observer, was a participant, fully engaged in the dangerous, exhilarating, and transformative journey with Ethan. The final confrontation had been inevitable. Adrian had spent weeks navigating the precarious line between vengeance and desire, each encounter with Ethan drawing him deeper into a web of conflicting emotions. Now, standing face to face in the quiet intimacy of Ethan's apartment, the tension was almost unbearably heady mix of anticipation, fear, and longing. Every decision, every word, every subtle movement carried the weight of the journey that had brought them to this point. Adrian's mind raced. He could still execute the plan he had meticulously crafted, deliver the justice he had sought, and satisfy the burning need for revenge that had fueled him for so long. Yet, standing here with Ethan, he realized the devastating truth. The man before him was no longer just the target of his anger. Ethan was human, layered with vulnerabilities, courage, and unexpected kindness. Every confession, every laugh, every shared glance had transformed the mission into something far more dangerous and far more meaningful. Ethan stepped closer, the space between them charged with electricity. "I know there's been distance between us," he said quietly, voice trembling slightly with honesty, "but I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't know how to be better." His eyes searched Adrian's, vulnerability laid bare, raw and disarming. Adrian's breath caught. For a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. The weight of months of tension, betrayal, and unspoken longing pressing down like a physical force. The air was thick with emotion. Adrian could feel his carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the intensity of the moment. Anger, once a driving force, now mingled with something far more unpredictable. Desire, empathy, and the fragile stirrings of love he had fought so hard to deny. The man he had intended to punish was no longer just a figure of resentment. He was a living, breathing presence that had infiltrated the deepest recesses of his heart. Adrian took a cautious step forward, then another, closing the distance that had felt insurmountable for weeks. Every instinct screamed caution. Every rational thought reminded him of the betrayal. Every memory of strategy urged restraint. Yet the force drawing him toward Ethan was undeniable, a gravity that neither plan nor calculation could resist. He reached out, a tentative gesture, and Ethan responded, their hands meeting in a touch that was both electrifying and grounding. In that moment, Adrian realized the true cost of revenge, not in material losses or shattered plans, but in the risk of losing connection, intimacy, and love. He understood that the pursuit of vengeance had brought him face to face with the one thing he had never anticipated: the possibility of forgiveness, the possibility of reconciliation, and the possibility of a love that could emerge even from the wreckage of betrayal. The tension that had defined their relationship transformed in an instant into something fragile, delicate, and profound. Words became unnecessary as their eyes spoke volumes, carrying unspoken promises, questions, and the acknowledgement of a shared journey. The room seemed to shrink around them, leaving only the truth of the moment. Two hearts, intertwined in a dance between past wounds and future possibilities, poised on the edge of connection. Adrian understood that the final step was a choice, one that would determine not only the outcome of his mission, but the trajectory of his heart. Revenge could no longer be the guiding force. The complexities of desire, trust, and vulnerability had shifted the balance irreversibly, and in that choice, he found clarity. The path forward was not destruction, but connection. Not punishment, but love. As they drew closer, the last remnants of anger dissolved into a profound understanding. The fire that had once threatened to consume Adrian had transformed into something sustaining, a force that demanded honesty, courage, and surrender. The man he had set out to punish had become the man he longed to trust, the man whose presence could no longer be ignored or denied. The night closed around them, carrying the weight of every betrayal, every confrontation, and every moment of unexpected intimacy. Adrian realized that the true gift of their journey was not in vengeance achieved, but in love, discovered a love born of conflict, tested by fire, and made undeniable by the very emotions that had once threatened to tear them apart. In the quiet of the final moment, Adrian understood the profound truth that the price of revenge had been steep, but the gift of love was infinitely greater, reshaping his heart in ways he could have never anticipated.